You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, we're joined by a shot of Canton and a lot of hopes and dreams. We travel with a Wookiee companion, and we'll drop our cargo if approached by Star Destroyers. But we have some precious cargo for you today. A few news items to share this week as we look back on what's been popular at the Overhead Wire, our weekly newsletter. Actually, it's a daily newsletter. And I'm surprised that I don't remember that because I do it every day. We go through about 1,500 news items every day, and we pick the best ones for folks who are listening. You can subscribe for a 2-week trial by going to theoverheadwire.com and check it out. This is episode 72, Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. Before we get to the news, I want to let folks know they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And subscribing means you get both Mondays at the Overhead Wire and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. Thanks to folks that subscribe through podcatchers as well. It's awesome that you keep coming back to the show. We really do appreciate it. So, let's just, stuff's been going on. There's been a lot of political stuff. There's a lot of advertising on our televisions. You all might know that. Televisions, on your podcasts, on your YouTube videos, wherever you may be, you'll see an advertising blast from everywhere. It seems really crazy. And I've already voted. I'm actually happy to say that I've already turned my ballot in, and it's on its way to the election commission here in San Francisco. And I'm looking forward to seeing when it arrives. I will say there's been a number of things happening out there in terms of like ballot boxes and voter suppression and things like that. And I will say that, I really appreciate what's been going on here in San Francisco. I think it was last year or maybe a year before that, I actually didn't sign the back of my ballot, and when I sent it in, and they sent me another, because I did it early enough, they sent me another mail saying, you didn't sign your ballot, sign this affidavit saying that was your ballot. And I did that and then sent it back in, and it registered as a vote. So I was happy to do that. And I hope that folks can remember to sign the back of their ballots, remember to do whatever it is you need to do in your state. I know every state's different, but make sure that it gets done and it gets in, and put that vote out there. I mean, if you're a U.S. citizen, and are allowed to vote in the United States, then it's a good thing to exercise your right. So let's keep that going, and looking forward to what happens on November 3rd. And also, not a big announcement yet, but we'll have an announcement sometime soon about November 3rd. So keep your calendars open. Hopefully there's going to be something fun that I'm planning, I'm scheming to see if folks are interested in on that night, instead of maybe sitting around watching election returns from CNN or MSNBC or wherever you get your news. Maybe we'll have an alternative for those who are interested in thinking about transportation stuff. So with that said, let's go to the odds and ends, shall we? So this is the odds and ends. The odds and ends are a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. Hopefully informative. Here's what we've got. So to collect these, I usually go through some of the items that were the most clicked in the newsletter, and these were some of the most clicked and most interesting items I think people took a shining to when they went through the newsletter during the week. So this from the last 2 weeks. There's a variation of items, and I'm looking forward to talking about them in a little bit greater detail. So the first one is from ReCode, which is written by Eric Adams, and it's an article about self-driving vehicles. We're years away from self-driving cars. So even though automobile companies presented big promises to have fully autonomous cars by 2021, there are multiple planning and technological barriers that will need to be overcome before these vehicles become an everyday reality. Edge cases such as the weather and the differences between inanimate objects such as leaves or bricks on the road need to be conquered, though some believe it's unlikely to ever happen. So this was an interesting piece, but also I will say that there was a piece today in the New York Times discussing how some car companies are trying to put together V2X solutions so that their vehicles don't hit cyclists or pedestrians by giving cyclists some sort of an indicator or a tracer. I don't know if we need that technology, but rather we need the political will to actually make this specific issue of safety a bigger deal. And I think that's possible, as we learned on a couple of the last few episodes. It's possible to actually make it something that's really important. So, that's kind of my opinion on it. I know that there's a lot of technologists that think that this is the answer of connecting people through to bikes and vehicles through sensors, but I think there are just much better ways that don't trace us and track us and have us required to have a beeper on us at all times, or have a vehicle that has a beeper on it, or you know what I mean by beeper, just like some sort of a tool that connects vehicles together through 5G or whatever it might be. But there's also, this is also kind of a plug for an upcoming show we're doing with Anthony Townsend, who wrote the wonderful book Ghost Road. He actually believes the safety issue is kind of a red herring, as the cars are either going to be safe or they're not going to be safe. There's so many other issues that self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, whatever you want to call them. I know some people like certain names over others, but there's other issues that he talks about in the book that I think are really fascinating, including financialization. He talks about how maybe, congestion pricing is kind of an entry point for all these other financialization possibilities for companies to continue to charge you money to do certain things on the road. And I found that was really interesting. We have a larger discussion about that, but something to look out for when Talking Headways comes back with Anthony in a couple of weeks. So I know that that'll be here soon, but not quite yet. But back to self-driving cars. Do I think they'll be here in 5 or 10 years? Probably not. Streets and roads and weather is almost too unpredictable, but it'll probably be okay for freight. I will say we're also going to have some folks from Neuro on the show, and it made me think about that perhaps our problem isn't necessarily autonomy and whether the vehicles can see people or things or whatever, but it's speed. The speed at which people drive or want to be driven is part of the problem. They want to go fast to get to their destination. And these little vehicles, they don't really have that problem. They're just carrying cargo that are, the cargo is not looking at its watch every 10 seconds and asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? They're just carrying cargo. And, our impatience, I think, is what kills people. And perhaps that's the big issues these companies need to contend with when they're thinking about passenger vehicles and speed, and our need to always be somewhere and somewhere fast. That might be the biggest problem for these self-driving vehicles, because for cargo, it doesn't seem to matter as much. You can go slower and get to your destination. I mean, we know that Domino's and the hot pizza right away is a thing, but that might not be such a big deal if the vehicles go 20 or 60 miles an hour, if they're only going, maybe about a generally 10-minute trip. So that might be something that we need to look out for, is the idea of speed rather than just what can be sensed, because the sensing at speed is the hard part. Next up, e-bike rebate program could support a boom. So during the pandemic, more and more people have used bicycles to get around, and it proves that promoting bike share programs and cycling infrastructure can encourage the use of sustainable mobility. To further this, the next logical step is to extend e-bike rebates and subsidies to support the growth of the sustainable mode, which 65% of purchases were made to replace auto trips. So this is by Andy Olin at the Kinder Institute down in Houston. It's silly that we give personal car-sized vehicles $7,500 in subsidies, even more sometimes if you're in a specific state. But we could use those subsidies to help purchase bikes that take up less space and give them to more people. So I'm not totally against electric car subsidies necessarily, but it's all in the incentives and who gets the benefits. And it seems like giving people an electric bike incentive would be a win-win, especially if it's just, if you take that $7,500 that you're getting from wherever, break that down, that's like, I think it's seven. That's like seven. If you give people $500 each for an e-bike, that's 7 different e-bikes versus one electric car. I think you're taking so many more trips off the road that way. And there's some in the New York State Assembly that agree with that sentiment. Robert Carroll seems to agree, and he in his piece in Streets Blog, in a piece in Streets Blog New York City, he states, the current Drive Clean program offers a direct point-of-sale rebate of up to $2,000 to buyers of electric cars. A10974 would allow the state to offer a similar rebate for the purchase of e-bikes, covering 50% of the purchase price with a maximum rebate of amount of $1,100. So this is really fascinating. E-bikes vary widely in price from around $1,000 to about as much as $13,000. But this is a pretty good rebate. And if you're thinking about that $2,000, you could get 2 e-bikes for the price of 1 electric car rebate and not take up as much space. So I think that's really fascinating. And that 65% number is really interesting too. So almost 65% of North American e-bike owners said that replacing car trips was a main motivation for buying an e-bike. And we know that we're trying to reduce the number of trips that we're making for climate goals. People here in the Bay Area are thinking about reducing climate trips by just requiring major companies to work from home. But as folks have been arguing, that might not be the best way to go forward, because some of those people who are working from home are already making sustainable trips, especially if they were working in downtowns. They were already taking BART, or they were already walking or biking to work. It's those other trips that we really need to focus on. And so, this e-bike subsidy might actually be a good thing if we're trying to get people doing better trip-making decisions, I should say. That might be the best way to go. And then, that also means that you're going to have a less expensive trip as well, because you're not paying for gas, you're not paying for parking, you're not paying for all this stuff. In the article, Andy mentions that the average Houston household spends 20% of its income on transportation, and that's because people are getting around a lot. So their housing might be cheaper, but they spend a lot on transportation. And I should know, growing up in Houston, I was driving my car everywhere and filling up pretty often, and it seems to be a pretty good expense, even on my lifeguard money. So, that's something to consider as well. So I think this is a good idea, giving more e-bike incentives, less electric car incentives, but let's continue to move the way that we're moving. Next up, a challenge to large lot single-family zoning. Civil rights lawyers in Connecticut are taking on exclusionary zoning in the town of Woodbridge by asking the city to build a 4-unit building on a lot that allows only one home on 1.5 acres. If the project is rejected, the lawyers are prepared to take the city to court and believe the case could have statewide implications for zoning and the provision of affordable housing. So this is by Jacqueline Rabe Thomas of CT Mirror. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So Anika Singh Lamar, Aaron Boggs, Connie Royster, and Karen Anderson, civil rights attorneys, are looking for a way to change the law when it comes to the inequities and exclusionary process of zoning in small towns in Connecticut and even the U.S., because if this court case goes further, there might be some sort of a kickback from that finding later on for the whole country. But in 2009, the town of Woodbridge in Connecticut purchased about a 150-acre property for about $7 million to make sure that it wasn't taken by affordable housing developers. And in the last 30 years, just 3 2-unit homes have received building permits. So these lawyers, who are part of this organization called the Open Communities Alliance, are basically asking the Planning and Zoning Commission to approve a 4-unit home on a 1.5-acre lot zoned for single family. And this is a community that hasn't allowed much affordable housing. They only have large lot zoning, which means that you have an acre and a half, which if you're here in San Francisco and things are like 40 units an acre, that's, basically 50 units you can fit on that 1 unit. But, this is a more suburban area, but still, I think it's silly that we still have these restrictions for 1 unit per acre in these places. But basically, they're trying to push the envelope on towns and what they're thinking in terms of zoning and large lot zoning and exclusionary zoning. Basically, they're trying to prove that exclusionary zoning is just as insidious as outright racial discrimination, which doesn't allow certain folks to move in next to other people. And the opposition has been there for a long time in the town, and they're basically worried about school enrollment and rural, quote unquote, rural character of the town. But the data actually shows that school enrollment is down. So just like in other places here in the Bay Area, for example, like Palo Alto, where school enrollment is also down because they're not replacing, homeowners growing old. They're not getting new homeowners. They're not getting new residents in the neighborhood because they're not building any new housing units. And so school enrollment is reducing. And so it's likely that they're going to get less money from the state. They're going to get less money for schools. And then they might even have to close some schools down. So this is a silly argument in terms of school enrollment that they've made before. But these groups are always going to make silly arguments. But I think it's an interesting look at this kind of this movement of pushing the suburbs and pushing towns to do better about their zoning and making sure that everybody has access to do whatever they want on their land, whether that's build more housing units or whatever. This is kind of one of the things that I think is funny in arguments and the fights that we have is that a lot of the times if you wanted to build like 4 units on your property, you couldn't, even though it's your land, you paid for it. And basically everybody around you decides what you get to do with your property, which is kind of silly in my mind anyways. There should be some restrictions, but for the most part, it seems silly. If you fit the height, you fit the massing of the zoning code, then why not be able to do what you want to do? So, you guys know where I stand on this. I know where most of you all stand on this as well. I just think it's interesting to see what's coming up in Connecticut. So next up, unprecedented small business loss and low labor participation rates. Since the pandemic began, the country's wealthiest have increased their hoard by $845 billion, as small businesses are facing losses never seen during any recession. Experts believe the pain is likely to get worse, given an already low labor participation rate and looming reductions in unemployment benefits. The failure of decision makers to realize existing damage could also make recovery harder. So this kind of goes back to like what's happening at the federal level. There's a big fight, obviously, between benefits and the stimulus packages that have been coming out. There was a person, I can't remember exactly who it was, and it just came to my head right just now that this person said this, but this person basically said, he told everybody that, there's basically, we can't do too much to get the economy back on track. There's so many people that are suffering, so much that's going on because of the pandemic that we just need to stimulate it. And then the Republicans come out and have a smaller stimulus package that Nancy Pelosi said, no, we're not going to do that. And then also they tried to just do airlines, which seems ridiculous to me without transit. Come on. Transit is taking essential workers places. Airlines have done stock buybacks and all that stuff. I hardly feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for the workers. I don't feel sorry for the executives and all those folks who have been kind of pillaging for the last 10 years or so, ever since the last crunch. So there's a kind of a thing going on there as well. But so in this piece, they're talking about basically, the labor force participation rate is going down. We're having problems because of coronavirus. People aren't going out and spending. People aren't going out to their local neighborhoods and restaurants and things like that. Downtowns are suffering because people aren't coming to work. And those types of things. So I think, basically the labor force participation rate was 63% in January of 2019. And due to COVID-19, it's now it went to about 60% in April, and now it's at 61% last month, 61.4%. So Joseph Wilson, a labor historian and a consultant, had this comments in this article, which was in Salon. And I just wanted to read this part because I thought it was really actually a really good discussion of the issue. So, quote, "The American pandemic recovery model is speeding down the wrong track. The Treasury Department's vault is wide open to the tune of trillions for the largest corporation, bondholders, and hedge funds, while the $600 per week federal pandemic unemployment compensation funds have vanished. This will inevitably result in an even more bifurcated economy, with a full recovery for those on top, and pain, suffering, unemployment, and increased poverty for the working class. Public service and frontline workers will get shafted, and the top 1% will get yachts and caviar. This is why the European recovery model, is in which workers' wages are maintained by government subsidies, will lead to a more comprehensive, sustainable, and socially equitable recovery. The political economies of Europe and the United States stand in sharp contrast." So it's just so frustrating that we continue to give more and more to the top earners of the country without safeguards for everybody else who participates in the consumer and the labor markets. In case people were wondering why socialism is getting greater appeal these days to many, especially younger folks who have never seen government do anything great for them and continue to have go into labor markets that are suffering because of either the pandemic or because of collapses, etc. In case you were wondering why people were going that direction, it's because the rules that are written for capitalism at the moment are written to give money to people that don't need it, the rich people. And, that's something that's been happening for the last several 10 years. And you can see it with certain people that are only paying $750 in taxes, who are feeding themselves money basically in ill-gotten ways. This New York Times report on the taxes of the Trump company and all that stuff is just insane. It's insane how much people get out of stuff. I'm proud to pay my taxes, I must say. I've even told people this over email recently when, I was asked about certain things. I said, I'm proud to pay my taxes. I'm glad to pay my taxes. Or are there certain things I wish we wouldn't pay taxes and fund? Yes, I don't think we need a new strike jet fighter. I think we could use universal health care and those types of things. But at the same time, our taxes go to programs that help people. it just, I guess it depends on who's in power as to how those things get spent. But, I'm happy to pay my fair share. And I'm very upset and very disappointed that certain people don't think they should be paying their fair share. And that doesn't just go for individuals, but that goes to companies as well who are hiding in offshore accounts or trying to write off everything they possibly can. I'm all about a good write-off that actually is a business write-off. But don't tell me that your $70,000 hair appointments are able to be written off. That's just simply ridiculous. So anyways, you can tell I'm frustrated with that, but it's something that I think a lot of folks are frustrated with as well. And, if you work hard in this country, you pay your taxes, you do all the right things, it should be rewarding for that, not a disincentive. Next up, a zero-emissions neighborhood. Planners in the Norwegian city of Bergen are building a zero-emissions regenerative neighborhood from a sprawling warehouse and container district called Dokken. In order to reach the goal, lifecycle accounting will measure each step of the process, and with no private owners to negotiate with, the goals will be set high to push the limits of innovation. So this was by one of our favorites, Adele Peters in Fast Company. I don't know how she finds all these great things to write about, but she does. This is a pretty cool project, and I must say that if you ever get a chance to go to Bergen, Norway, it's an amazing, amazing place. I was there in 2011, and I just loved it. It is a little bit rainy, but it is beautiful. And actually, funny story, we actually took a train from Oslo to Bergen, which is also an amazing trip. This is we took it in August, September, so it's before the winter comes and the light's still about the same. But, my mom and my dad and I went traveling in Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and it was a really good trip. We took trains everywhere. And then when we got to Bergen, my mom hadn't really asked to go many places. And so she asked to go to this stave church, basically built in the 1200s. And so we actually ended up going and getting a car and driving, basically half a day one way and half a day back to see this church that was basically shellacked to within an inch of its life, but it was still there, this amazing church in this valley. And it was probably one of the, the coolest, most beautiful things we've seen is that countryside of Norway outside of Bergen. So if you ever get a chance, go to the Stave Church, go to Bergen, check out their light rail line. They have funiculars, they have all kinds of really cool stuff. And the downtown is beautiful. The harbor is amazing. The weather is crisp. It may be a little bit wet, but it's a really awesome place. And this neighborhood, sounds like it's really going to be awesome too. It'll have 0 cars. It'll have green space on the waterfront. It'll clean up the landscape from the previous uses. They're going to dig up material and ask actually if other people need it. So it's going to be regenerative and recycling in that way. I hope this project actually gets some attention and awards and they actually pull it off. I really like the idea that they're going to account for life cycle costs too of everything that they bring in, whether that's the wood, whether it's the concrete, anything that they build, they're going to account for the whole life cycle and try to get to net zero, which is pretty impressive. We'll see what happens. And finally, this is the last but not least piece that we have this week. I'm really excited about this one. Just for the sheer fact that I've been reading about it forever. So Venice will finally avoid the tides. Venice, Italy is known for its canals and waterways and the fact that the city is slowly sinking into the lagoon in which it sits. High tides frequently cover a third of the city, but last week barriers built in the lagoon held back the water for the first time ever. The barriers have been subject of numerous controversies, including corruption, over a decade of delays, and large cost overruns, but now officials are happy they are finally completed and work as planned. This piece was by Colleen Barry in the AP Associated Press. So there are 78 barriers now and 5 entrance spots in the lagoon to Venice, Italy. And, last November they had the worst tides in 53 years in November. And this project is now holding back some of those tides and making it so that in St. Mark's Square, which sometimes during these tides, they actually have to build these 2 foot or 2 foot wide plank walkways above the water so that people can actually get around the area. They didn't have to do it this time because of the barriers, which is really cool. It was supposed to cost only 1.8 billion euros, $2 billion, but it was actually meant to be completed in 2011. But the project has cost 5.5 billion euros and is a decade behind schedule, but it's finally finished. And the system will be deployed when the tides are at 43 inches or just under 4 feet. So with climate change and all that other stuff happening, you can tell how this is going to be really impactful for Venice, and maybe like a way for other cities to see, how to do it. I'm thinking, the Netherlands has this figured out. If Venice has finally figured this out, maybe someone like New Orleans could figure this out as well. Although it's a little bit of a different system in terms of the water works that would be needed, because it's not quite the same lagoon with limited entrances and barriers. But it's something to be thinking of. Natural waterways and things like the Mississippi are really fascinating, and the Army Corps of Engineers has really tried to keep it going down the same path when it really wanted to go down a different path towards away from New Orleans. And so we'll see how much nature can push back against human ingenuity. But I'm really interested to see if these are some of the things that people employ when they're thinking about climate change and sea level rise, especially if it's going to get to that 2, 3, 4, 5 feet grouping, because it's just, some of these communities that are by the water are just going to be damaged beyond repair. And this is kind of an indicator species, I would say. So I was excited to read about that. And hopefully you all were excited to listen about it too. All right. So that's it for this week. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You all are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it. So thank you very much. Especially during the pandemic, we really appreciate it. I know that a lot of folks and a lot of agencies and a lot of people that support us have had a little bit of a hard time. So anything that you all can do to support us in that way, we really appreciate it. We know that it's tough. It's a tough time for folks, especially from a monetary perspective. But anything you all do or anything you're already doing for us, we really, really appreciate that. So we wouldn't be able to do this show without the Patreon support. So again, it's really appreciated. So $2 a month will get you some stickers, and $10 a month will get you your bus-only scarf. And I've only got about 50 left. So the weather is getting cold. Get yourself a scarf. Get a couple scarves to give to your friends. Give them to folks as Christmas presents, maybe Halloween costumes. You can get those. We've got a few left, and I hope maybe I'll order some more if they get popular again. Over the winter, and I think they will. So maybe I should just do that automatically. You can also get the bus only scarf if you go to the website, but you can do it by being that $10 a month supporter on Patreon, and we really appreciate that. And also, finally, I want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning and Practice. If you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com, or you can get there from theoverheadwire.com. You all, this book is, I really like it. It's one of those books that it's actually the number one book on APA's planning books you have to read from the after 1900. And so I think, it's one of those books. Patrick Geddes is on there. I'm hoping to maybe do that one as well in the future. But this is one of the first ones. And I think it really kind of still resonates today. It's still a really awesome book, and now all you have to do is just listen to it. You can, if you go to Raymond Unwin and you go to AweSound, you can get it and listen to it like a podcast. Each chapter is a different podcast episode. So check that out if you get a chance. We really appreciate that. If you all want to pick up one of those too, we worked hard on that. Had a good reader. It's not me. Had a good reader. Have a really good format, and the book's really good. So check it out if you get a chance. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any social site where the podcast appears. We had some, Brian O'Looney was on the show on Talking Headways this last Thursday. We had Chris Pangilinan from Uber on the week before that. And my appeal to not vote for Prop 22, you can go back and listen to that. I won't repeat it here, but I just want to mention that it's there. Go back and check out our old episodes. We have some really great episodes coming up too. I really appreciate you guys listening and following along. So looking forward to sharing some of those new ones that we've got coming up with Anthony Townsend, with Neuro. We've got some really good books coming out that I think you guys are really going to like from different authors and things outside of the usual realm of transportation that are really cool. So I've got those worked out, and I've got podcasts all the way through, planned all the way through November. So we're set, and I look forward to sharing those with you. Puppies and Butterflies, this is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. You know what? This week we put up Halloween decorations, and I've got a Happy Halloween. I've got a spider. I've got pumpkins. I've got dripping blood asking for help. I've got skeletons and haunted houses too up on the wall in the windows. So I appreciate that. That Halloween is coming soon. October is my favorite month. I'm looking forward to carving pumpkins. Even if we can't give out candy to kids, I'll probably still order candy. What would you all dress up as for this year if you were able to go out for Halloween? Or maybe you're just going to dress up and walk around with a mask on. I don't know, but let me know. Send us an email, theoverheadwire@gmail.com, and I'd love to read out next time we're on what folks are going to be doing for Halloween. So that's it. That's it for this week. I appreciate you all. You can find me online at The Overhead Wire on Twitter or theoverheadwire.com. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. And thanks again, as always, to our generous Patreon supporters for sponsoring this week's podcast. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Han Solo. Thanks, Chewbacca. And we'll see you next time.